so excited to have Jayson Greene and Mattie Lubchansky here with us tonight to celebrate UnWorld. We have some housekeeping to go over. We'll be doing a hand-raised Q&A at the end of the discussion. So think of your questions, hold on them tight, we'll get them answered. If afterwards, Jayson will be signing and personalizing near where you checked in. We will let you know when, where to line up for that. If you're joining us virtual live stream, you can buy a copy of UnWorld. You can link in the description. If you're here, you can buy a copy from us here. A lot of holidays are coming up, such as the solstice. And you probably forgot Father's Day. So you should buy.
It's a perfect solstice gift, really, truly.
Perfect related Father's Day, perfect. 4th of July, I don't know. Perfect Election Day gift.
It's a terrible holiday.
It's a book. Books for the holidays. Okay, and the book you will be buying is UnWorld, a gripping novel about 4 intertwined lives that collide in the wake of a mysterious tragedy. Set in the near future world where the boundaries between human and AI blur, the story challenges our understanding of consciousness and humanity. Jayson Greene, star of tonight's show, is the author of Once More We Saw Stars, which we also have here tonight for you to purchase, and a contributing writer and former senior editor at Pitchfork. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife and son. This is his first novel. Conversation extraordinaire. Mattie Lubchansky is a cartoonist and illustrator. She is also an Ignatz winner, a Herblock Prize finalist, and the author of Boys Weekend, which we also have here tonight for you to purchase. And the Antifa Super Soldier Cookbook. Her next book, Simplicity, comes out at the end of July, and the event will also be here. So we'll see you next month.
Yeah.
And she'll be in beautiful Queens, New York, with her spouse. Without any further. Oh, also tonight, we had the option of a book ticket or a $10 donation ticket. You are still able to make do more donation tickets tonight in increments of $10. All those proceeds are going to support Make the Road New York, which helps tackle discrimination, abuse, and poverty by empowering immigrant and working class communities. And now, without any further ado, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to Jayson and Mattie.
Hi.
Hi.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I think you're going to start with the reading from the book. Do you want us to talk first before the reading? What do you want to do? I don't know. It's your party, bud.
No, yes. I was going to start with a reading.
Yeah.
I just thought then after that it'll make a little more sense.
Yeah, I think
what
so.
We're talking about. So
yeah.
I mean, I feel like that little spiel, this is a very echoey microphone, did a pretty good job. But I will say that it takes place in a world where people have uploads of themselves in a way that you would now interact with your Siri or your Alexa. And I hope no one just goes off when I say that out loud in the crowd. But it's you. It is yourself. It's your consciousness. And it is a way that you can keep yourself company. It's a way that you can move through the world. There's many ways that people use these companions. So in the section I'm about to read, one of the main characters, her name is Anna, and she's a bereaved mother. And she and her upload have grown estranged. They are no longer on speaking terms. And the section I'm going to read is her recounting her memory of the first time that her upload switched on. The last detail is that she goes into her son's bedroom and finds the chip. Upstairs, I paused at my bedroom door, hearing Rick's delicate papery snore, and walked down the hall, pushing open the door to Alex's room. It was there that I saw it, embedded in the fibers of the rug, her connective chip, glinting out at me in the moonlight. It seemed impossible that I would have seen such a tiny thing in the room's darkness, but something about the shaft of moonlight coming in the window caught it perfectly. How had it traveled up here? I probably hadn't looked at it this closely since the day Rick gave her to me. When he'd first handed me the slim cream-colored box, like something for chocolate or jewelry, I was too stunned to even muster up a thank you. It was like he'd cat-burgled something out of my subconscious and handed it back to me. I saw the look on your face the other night at Jen's, Rick said, by way of explanation. He was right, amazingly. We'd been to her house not long before that birthday, and she told us about a meeting her upload had gone to, as in, on its own, without Jen. This wasn't like a recording, she'd emphasized. It was like I was really there, except I wasn't. I'm pretty sure we just stood at her, uncomprehending, because then she raised her voice, as if addressing someone in the next room. Jen, can you give me a rundown of that meeting? And then, I don't remember where the sound came from exactly. Well, there came Jen's voice, just not out of Jen's mouth. The account of the meeting that voice delivered was one that only Jen could have given, arch, airy, a little gossipy, with one or two catty comments about people at the firm I knew she couldn't stand. Jen on her couch, lips pursed, wry smile, hoping badly to impress us and succeeding. Rick, I'm pretty sure, shrugged it right off afterward, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. This collection of your own memories, thoughts, and experiences hovering around out there somewhere, invisible. This little cloud of you getting on with your life in ways that you couldn't and reporting back to you. Apparently, I kept wondering out loud what Jen's felt like. Or I supposed I must have, because that's what Rick told me the morning of my 40th. Jen said the first day is a weird one, Rick said, clearly trying to prompt some kind of reaction. You won't hear anything for 24 hours. Wonderingly, I reached behind my ear and felt the chip fasten itself. When I cried out involuntarily, Rick was all over me with a look of such pure worry I almost laughed. What does it feel like? He asked. Like your arm waking up, I told him. I remembered another feeling from when I was a girl, the ominous tingling of my first allergic reaction to antibiotics. I pressed down on my eyelids with my forefingers and watched the muddy lights bloom and settle like dirt on a creek bed. For the rest of that first day, she felt like a hum. The refrigerator, the radiator, just something familiar, something that was just on. It also seemed I was tasting something, a bitter flavor, burnt coffee or baking chocolate. Saliva poured into my mouth. My heart quickened. My face flushed. Before bed that night, I stood in front of the mirror, examining the bump in my nose, my green eyes and thin lips. I bit them slightly to redden them. I had been waiting for the nudge, holding my breath for her all day. Then something opened. Another eye looking through mine. Immediately, I felt bigger, not taller exactly or anything physical. There was just more of me taking up this bathroom than there had been before. My chest tingled with a burning, like I had just swallowed a shot of something. I stared deeper into my eyes. They seemed greener, my hair redder. Did I open my mouth and say something out loud, or did I just think it? Hello. Then a rising, stirring feeling, and then in the chip behind my ear, barely bigger than a salt crystal, my own voice. Hello. Hot tears sprang to my face, surprising me. It felt like a physiological response more than an emotional reaction, as if my mind were test driving little nerve clusters in my brain. Happy birthday, I whispered to both of us. In the first few days online, she kept mostly quiet, asking occasional questions as she monitored my pulse, my breathing rate, and tracked the neurochemicals coursing in my bloodstream. I could sense her growing smarter, more textured. She was wringing information from it all. Some people found the sensation creepy or predatory. For me, it was more like mutual fullness, a flow between two beings that nourished both. Where do you go when you're not with me? I asked her once. It's sort of like I'm dreaming, she answered. Everything that I see is something that's happened to you, but none of it's brought into focus until we sync. When you call, it's like being awakened. For Christ's sake, she'd asked me to leave her alone. What did such a request from a source like that say about a person's inner life? This seemed like a question I might not want to lose too much sleep pondering. No, Rick could handle all the introspection. For me, the answer seemed to just keep doing the next thing, whatever that might be. Work, sleep, don't sleep, wash dishes, whatever. In the meantime, your thoughts were going to do whatever thoughts did. You could sort of live alongside them or even outside them if you practiced. Amazing, really, when you boiled it down, how elementary the decision was to keep living. Suddenly moved by some cocktail of dubious impulses, nostalgia, spite, heedlessness, I brought the chip to my ear and reattached it in one smooth, fluid motion. Closing my eyes, I was flooded with the familiar warmth and the accompanying tug of distraction. When she came online, I always felt like there was something important I was struggling to remember. Right now, I could feel her hovering somewhere in the space above me, like a disapproving genie who had already granted my 3 wishes and was now waiting for the terms of our contract to expire. I looked down at the rug as if she had eyes I was unwilling to meet. I'm sorry, I said by way of introduction. I waited. A flicker? Maybe nothing. I know you asked me for, some space. I promise I won't make this a habit. Silence. Well, she wasn't telling me to go away. I'll stop there.
That was beautiful. I've read this book twice now, and I was always really just very taken with how beautiful the prose is. I want to start by getting it out of the way because I know the book's not really about it, but the book is about AI, right? And everybody's always talking about it and thinking about it now because it's taking over everything. But I just like I think there's so many ways this is not a book about like AI like in the moment. I just wanted to like let's just get through that.
You wanted to like just push through.
Let's just get through it, man.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was sort of like I've always been fascinated by the idea of a mind that was sort of at war with itself. And to be honest, that was where I started with this. And I had this idea long before I had grief in my life, before Greta passed, before anything, where it was the idea of a woman whose upload had decided to split from her. And that struck me as this sort of fundamental break. And it made me think a lot about what are the parts of ourselves that we are trying to get rid of. And it was around the time that I first had this idea that people in Silicon Valley were really trying to convince people that we're all going to be existing somewhere in the digital ether. We're going to be uploading our minds, right? And I just found something so poignant in the drive to do it. It was more about what is the drive that is motivating us to try to take so much of ourselves outside of our bodies, outside of our minds, and entrust it to something else, somewhere else, put it out in the ether, right? Like, what does that say about how much we're trying to get away from ourselves? And that was like the only reason that this book became an AI book, in large part, was because I found something so poignant in that disembodied nature of it. And it became a way to explore these feelings.
Yeah, and because I think the AI in the book is so different than like a chat bot that you run into in everyday life. Like those things are agreeable, and this one is so much of it is like about almost like suffering a breakup with somebody.
Right, for sure.
Which ChatGPT would never break up with you, baby.
Well, no, and
Like,
actually
what's
what's happening is that ChatGPT is in fact feeding people answers that they want to hear and sending them into spirals of delusion. It's doing the opposite.
So what we need is like a meaner AI, you think?
Make AI mean again? No, that's not really the problem.
Yeah. So, and you talk about like the emotions of the book is the genesis of the book was this sort of person at war with themselves, but then it sort of evolved into this other thing about grief when you encountered that in your life. Are you worried at all about being like the grief guy in your writing? Not to be glib, like because you don't want to be pigeonholed, right? Like,
I mean, no is the short answer. I will probably always be on some level the grief guy. I mean, so much of what I have felt like I've been compelled to share and to say, and what's moved me to write has come from this very primal impulse. It's been very important to me. I mean, I don't know that. I mean, there's another way to sort of talk about this, which is to say that I've had the thought very consciously, and I think it's going to be the case that. I think I needed 2 books to work through whatever emotions I felt about the passing of our daughter. And I think now, whatever I go on to do or to choose to write, I'm pretty sure that it won't be about that anymore. But I mean, grief is one of the most symphonic and universal and powerful emotions that we all have. And so I'll never be afraid to say something about it. Yeah,
I mean, there's obviously lots and lots to talk about.
Yeah, grief is hot.
With it. I mean, you can see
industry.
Yeah, you can see I'm flipping through my very analog system here because I don't want the computers to get me. In terms of to that point about like the writing about the same things, obviously this is your first fiction book.
Yeah.
So like what were there like unique challenges to you to switching over from nonfiction? Because before that you were also doing like music journalism, essay writing, a nonfiction book about grief, and then this like fiction book that's a completely different animal. Like what was there anything like really hard for you?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
next question.
Yeah. Okay. Great answer.
It was insanely hard.
Yeah.
But also because I just didn't have the vocabulary. There were so many things about this book where I was trying to write about out-of-body feelings, and it was really about all the nameless stuff I mean, the reason I wrote this was I had the idea and it struck me, but I think what I was truly doing was working through whatever was left in my system, right? When I wrote the memoir about this time in our lives in between the death of our daughter and the birth of our son, it was like I was sort of writing from this place of clear and clean sort of tragedy and trauma, where I knew exactly why I was writing the story that was on the page. I knew exactly what it meant. And it was sort of written in this rush of grief and exhilaration that was sort of like a spiritual triage unit type of a situation, where I was like, I must get this out, and it must take this specific form. Mm-hmm. And it was an exorcism, right? I mean, there's like a direct parallel, I think, to this idea that the characters in this book are looking to take things out of themselves and store them in safe, leak-proof containers. I mean, and my books are out there in the world, hopefully doing that for me, right? I mean, that's sort of like we're trying to extricate these things. And when I finished Once More We Saw Stars, I felt like there was all this nameless malaise and confusion that lingered in my life, which had settled into like a beautiful new rhythm. And, I was living the life that after we lost our daughter, we weren't sure we'd ever live, right? We were suddenly in a new neighborhood, and we were taking our beautiful son to and from school and picking him up and talking with parents at the, about classrooms and stuff. It's all this stuff that you don't ever imagine you'll do again. Yeah. And it was so beautiful, but there was also something and it was always it was almost like a part of me was afraid to trust or believe in the reality around me, because there was something wrong somewhere. It was like a whisper. It's like, well, this is perfect, but I'm older than I thought I'd be when my child was this old. Mm. And it became a confusing sort of whisper of unreality. And I didn't know how to express that, right? I don't know how to write a story about these feelings, this unease that perhaps what you're living isn't as real as you want it to be. And I don't know another way to tell those stories except through fiction, because I feel like that's what fiction does. It tells the nameless stories, the ones that you don't know what they mean. That's why you make up characters. That's why you create a world, because you're putting stuff into it, and you're like almost stepping back to see what happens in the reaction. You're like, I wonder what these characters will do if I make them do that. Oh, interesting. And like you are creating this thing out of a place of utter confusion. And I think that's why the book feels dreamlike in a way. It's because that's why I had to write it this way. But yeah, it took me 6 years. It took me 6 years to figure that out, in part because it was so ethereal, in part because it was like I was picking up an instrument and saying, I don't know how to play this today, but in 5 years, I'm going to give a big recital.
And here we are.
At the recital.
Yeah, I think also to that end, in terms of like the unpredictability of fiction, is like this difference in terms of like control you, the author, have over what people are going to get out of it, right? Like you can write a nonfiction essay, and like, sure, people can take away something crazy, and they will, but you have a modicum of like, here's what this is about, and I'm going to be very direct about what I want to say it about. In fiction, people can, like, that's where you encounter the author being dead. Like, was that like a new experience for you?
Get back to me later.
Okay.
I don't really know.
Yeah, I'm going to
guess we'll see in a couple months. I mean, no, I don't know the answer. I mean, I definitely felt like I was grasping at air and trying to claw it down onto the page, right? Which I think might be the way that fiction feels. But I think because I was also trying to write about a number of people who don't really share much in common with me in a world that doesn't share. It's like an abstracted version of our current life. I mean, it's a little bit intentionally unclear where and when the story happens. And so it's like a snow globe of sorts that you peer into. Is it a town? Is it a city? I left these questions purposefully vague because I wanted it to be this sort of parable-like space where a lot of things could happen. And yeah, I mean, then you run into like really simple and mundane, dumb questions like, does your character have apps on their phone?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know.
Do they have phones? It's kind
Can I use the word phone? Is that dumb? And then, some of those things you either spend a year trying to figure out, which companies are manufacturing cars in whatever year this is, or whatever the hell it is. Like, figuring out what the buckles look like and the spaceship, so to speak.
Right.
Or you just trust that there's an idea that's going to communicate itself emotionally, and you just give the barest amount to suggest a reality.
Yeah, and I think that's what's a lot. Another interesting thing about this book with that is like, it is not super concerned with like the ethical ramifications of the tech. Like, or it is in terms of like, is it a consciousness or not? But it is not like, oh, what does like AI do to the world? It's less of like a science fiction, speculative fiction exercise, and more of like almost like a magical realism exercise. Right. And I feel like that sort of dreamy world, like it always felt to me reading it like when you play a video game and like the rendering is bad and the fog is on.
Not sure I love this metaphor so far.
Sure. No, but just like you can't see more than 5 feet.
It's like a bad video game.
No, my computer's bad, which is to say my brain. No, like it's. I
do. Continue.
It's like this dreamy quality where you can't really see where everyone it almost feels like they're in a black box theater or something.
That's
kind of wandering around in this like void that I can't get a handle on.
Right, and I wanted the closest analog I think to a book that a lot of people have read is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is a book where it takes place in some kind of version of our world, and it's super mundane. It's like a Northeast sort of academy, but where? Like, is it in Massachusetts? Is it in Maine? Is it in New England? Where the hell are they? What year is it? And it's like the streets are rainy, and you can smell the trees, and there's all these things that are sensory and happening that put you in it. Like you don't know a lot. So it's this combination. I wanted the world, actually, I wanted it to feel more real than a black box theater, right? There are stores, there are like harsh lights, there are classrooms, there are, tables with a specific grain to them. Like there's detail, but it's sort of like this, I had to blur the sand around it a little bit to be like, where's the entry point? And so that was definitely something that I paced around the outside of the story for a long time, trying to figure out, where does this start? Where does it end?
Yeah, and like there are details, but it's everything sort of filtered through these people's heads that you're floating around in.
Right. It's also an intensely internal book. People like barely notice their surroundings.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day, and it's like a very unusual thing that there are 4 eyes in the book.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like eye characters. Like just like, and that's unusual even in multi POV novels where normally it's like someone's omnipotent or something, but this is 4 people.
Right. Usually if you read a book and there's like section 1, section 2, and they're all different characters, and it's like, like They're There by Tommy Orange was a book that came out a few years ago that did this amazing job. There's like 30 characters. Like I could not diagram that book to save my life, but I absolutely fucking loved it. And what was fascinating was that even as I read it, I was very clear that even though I didn't know exactly who I was reading about in relation to someone else, that he was very intentional, because some characters were I and all the other characters were third person. So it was like there was a map, right? And like you could diagram who was important, who was at the center of the story, and who was at the periphery by that choice. And as I wrote this book, I really felt like, okay, I have 4 different narrators, and actually one of my I brought this novel through an MFA program, which is like bringing just a box of broken machine parts and being like, this is a car. And they were like, I don't know what this is. This engine doesn't belong to anything I understand. And I was like, what's a car? Trust me. Yeah. But like one of the notes I got was that you shouldn't have, there's a lot of you can't and you shouldn't in MFA, which is funny, but like there's a lot of like, you shouldn't have 4 characters who are all the I. And at the time I remember thinking, oh, I didn't really think about my decision to do that. And then I did. And I decided that I was very intentionally going to keep it that way, because every single character believes that like they can't see anyone else. And this is a novel in many ways about calling out into the void and not hearing anything back. Right. And so each of them, like, we can see how they're connected, but we're also painfully aware that they have no concept of each other. Right. And the only way to do that is to submerge you in each person's subjective experience. I'm the only person that's experiencing this. No one else is going to see this, into my brain. No one else is going to relieve this claustrophobia. And if you give a third person, in some ways, you're like, don't worry, you're not really stuck in this. Yeah,
for sure. Like if there's a voice of God, then
there's no God.
We know if God exists, right? Yeah, exactly. The other thing I want to pull out is you mentioned something about like, there's so much time we're spending in these people's heads. And I think you did such a tremendously good job of making these people with experiences that are not yours, like pretty severely. Like they're just very different people to you,
Right.
the guy that I know. And I think like, what was your process for like getting in the head of like, like an anarchist addict, that one of the characters in the book, like how do you get there?
Well, I feel like there's like the specific answer to how I got in the head of an anarchist addict, which is like a funny question, and I love it.
Sure.
And also there's like the larger one of, it's sort of the answer to like how I projected a consciousness into these people who weren't me at all.
Yeah.
And like were very definitively not me. And pointedly, all of them are women.
I was gonna get there. Don't worry.
Oh, I can wait.
Yeah.
But like, I would say that, so for each of them, there was like a different way that I found sort of through the darkness of where I was and imagining who they were. And so in her particular case, I think that I realized that I wanted her character to be struggling with substance abuse and in recovery, because in the story, she has had to do some of that deep and deeply unpleasant spiritual work that you do in recovery. And one of the terms that gets thrown around by people who talk about recovery a lot is the God-sized hole. And she had faced the God-sized hole in her life, right? And I needed her to be funky and specific and a sort of character who moved with this sort of, what's the word I'm grasping at air for? Reflexive iconoclasm. I'm very unique, and there's a certain way in which people who are very bristly and very intellectual and very cerebral fight against moving through an experience that is super typical, right? There's a lot of books where you can sort of feel someone bringing the entirety of their intellectual arsenal and aiming it at a universal experience that just unfortunately reduces you to the crowd. You are having a universal experience. You are not unique. And there's you can discover these insights for yourself and they'll dawn on you with the force of epiphany, but it is the same one. And I wanted a character who squirmed against that, who was like, no, I'm going to have the most original recovery ever. And that's kind of what made her who she was.
Yeah, I think she's so fascinating. I want to move on to the first thing I wrote down, which is just the word women, period, which is the first question I have here. I don't want to be like,
exclamation point.
Let's all, I mean, I can change that. I don't want to be like, let's all give Jayson a round of applause for writing 4 women that are normal. But like, it's I think it is, what am I saying? I think it is notable that you've written 4 women that are normal as a man. And I think it is unusual. And I was just sort of taken
my first
with
title of the book, 4 women that are normal. Parentheses, by a man.
By a man.
Yeah.
And then the little clapping hands emoji, like that's all.
Yes.
No, but I think like what
you're welcome.
Yeah, like in a way that if there are male characters in the book, but they're very ancillary. Most of them are sort of like, you even did a stupid voice for one of them when you were reading before. There's like the husband, and he's like, "Hey everybody, how's it going?" Like
I didn't mean to do that.
No, it's fine. That's the voice I would do for a husband. But like, anyways, no, like what I'm saying is it would be notable if anyone wrote a book where almost every character is the same gender, including someone that doesn't have a body. And I was just curious if there was a thought process for you that I want to talk about specifically about the relationships between these women, or if it just kind of happened that way.
I'm like afraid to approach the microphone. No, I was very intentional. It was always kind of, I would say that when I told this story, but when I was like 13 and I wrote like a 80-page fantasy epic in pencil that nobody asked for, including the English teacher. I was really inspired by David Eddings' The Belgariad, which is just a complete ripoff of Tolkien. It's like guy finds thing, goes on quest, meets people. And I wanted to write my own, and I wrote got super carried away. I don't remember what we were actually supposed to do in that class, but I remember very specifically that it was one of the first things I wrote that had chapters, and I was so excited and so proud of it. And I wanted to show it to my older brother, who was 9 years older than me, and at the time was studying creative writing at NYU, and I absolutely worshipped him, idolized him. He was like living this life I didn't even know was real, and he was my brother. And he came home, and all I wanted to do was show him this story. I was like, please read this. And God bless my brother. He like took it extremely seriously. Like he critiqued it like a workshop. But the first thing he said when he sat down with me, he was like, Jayson, I just couldn't believe that you chose to make this protagonist a girl. And I remember being like completely befuddled, because that had never crossed my mind for a second. I was like, yeah. And he was like, no, it's just like, I didn't think you'd be able to get inside the head of like, it's, it's very hard. And I remember being befuddled, because I remember being like, I'm not sure that I would have been able to write this story if I'd made the character a boy. Like, it was just, so I say that just to say that I don't know exactly how or why this story spoke to me this way. But I do think that, for one, it's a story that I think has a lot to do with struggles that take place in the more feminine side of our culture, right? Which is like a very generic, broad way of saying it, right? It's a lot about the pain of being unnoticed, or the struggle, sometimes the scalding nature of being noticed as well. And also, I really, there are these relationships that I've seen in my life that I can't say that I have many models for in my life with and around other men, where you are intertwined with this person on like a spiritual level, and you chafe up against this bond, you are relying on it. And I felt like all these stories were inherently sort of feminine. And I also, I mean, I'm a straight man. I don't know what I can really say about and claim, but I have everything that I've ever sort of, like when I was in college, I remember every boy that I was friends with, that I was like, oh, this guy is just like me.
Yeah.
I really get this guy. And they all came out as gay.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. All right, cool. And I just, as I've gone on through life, I don't know but everything that's ever mattered to me, everything that's ever made sense to me is more feminine, is more on that side of the spectrum. When I was 17 years old, I was tested for ADHD, which I have. I learned 20 years later. And when I was 17 years old, I swear to God, the guy who gave this test, it was a series of bubbles, right?
Yeah.
And he asked my mother to leave. This is 1997.
Yeah.
He closed the door, and he turned to me, and he goes, "Are you a homosexual?" Dead serious.
Wow.
Which at the time in my life, I was like, it was a bit like that scene for me in A Christmas Story where everyone he sees says, "You'll shoot your eye out." And I was like, why does everyone keep saying this? No, but I mean, it was sort of like, for me, a moment of reckoning. Like, I do live at this crossroads, and it just came to me very naturally. I guess that's the best I can handle.
I mean, I got that a lot too, just FYI. Which is to say, I was also reading this, both times kind of struck with this, like, there is some gender to this book, I thought. You invited me to talk to you, for instance. I'm here. But like, there's something about like the idea of wanting to like exit your own body outside of being like a tech mogul, or being the guy from the, wanting to live forever because you're Gilgamesh, like, which those guys are all obsessed with, by the way.
Right.
But, there's something about wanting to leave your own body that is so, that does feel very like transgressive from a gender perspective. Like I connected a lot when I was a kid with this one Kurt Vonnegut story with people like figure out how to do it. Yeah. Called Unready to Wear. And, but yeah, was there anything to you about that? Like, I mean, this is what we're saying here. I mean, I see your shirt.
I wore this. I saw the TV glow. I'm manifesting. This movie actually, if you haven't seen it, it's by a trans filmmaker named Jane Schoenbrunn.
That's right.
Who wrote it and directed it. It's beautiful. It is sort of a trans fable, maybe I would say. I mean, it's not exactly in the text, but it's sort of in the text. It had a huge impact actually on two characters in the book for me, because it was sort of about this opening of a portal that swallows reality for two people, and how that is both terrifying and deeply yearned for by both of them. And I mean, I think for me, it had a more cerebral quality, like the desire to escape the body. Yeah. But I mean, I also felt like that's kind of what science fiction often does. It's like this desire to transfigure, transform, and remake the body. You're looking. I can see.
What?
Did we get a?
Oh, I was
Did we get
checking
something?
for it, but we're still
Yeah, okay.
good. Yeah, I think my watch is fast. But I think also to that bit in the book in terms of like the portal that swallows up the two of the characters. It's really hard as a writer of fiction to put someone making art or fiction into the fiction
Right.
that is not an obvious metaphor that stinks or does not like obviously stink to the reader. And I was struck with how real the thing in the book felt. Like were there any challenges in terms of like developing them, like working on, there's like the two characters like work on a movie, they're playing this video game, like there's just some stuff that feels the titular game of the book.
Yeah, right. I mean, is it a really bad answer if I just say no? It wasn't, honestly,
a great answer.
That wasn't something that, out of all the things, I think I struggled with the world that I had to create. But when I had to create the characters who were creating worlds inside themselves, that almost felt very second nature to me. I think I spend so much time up here. I mean, this book is really, it's about a lot of those people who have that sort of same, and you build castles in your imagination that are better than and safer than the place you live. And I don't know, that felt pretty natural.
Yeah. All right. We are going to open it up to audience questions, I think. Beautiful. So get your hands up if you have questions and I will call on you. And then Jayson will answer them.
Yeah. It's awkward because you haven't had a chance to read the book. So.
That's right. Well,
Brian?
So you mentioned that the book has 4 first-person kind of perspectives, and I'm curious on like a technical level how you went about finding the language for each one.
He asked about like the changing of the prose for each perspective of the novel. Repeating for the people.
Yeah. Well, I think that each character had a very different mind, and I did. So the prose in the first section, which is the woman Anna, who is sort of struggling to contain these primal emotions that she's trying to sequester away, basically, in her uploaded version of herself. The language is much more laconic, and I was drawing on a lot of, I mentioned Kazuo Ishiguro, but I was drawing most heavily on his style, which is like, the person in a Kazuo Ishiguro novel is in a spiritual prison of their own making, and they have no fucking idea. They're like bending over and looking at the flowers, and they don't understand how completely ensconced in their own prison they are. And the language is so chatty in a way that is so chilling, and you can feel their alienation on the surface. And so I mimicked that prose style a lot. And each character had a different sort of prose style. Kathy was much more verbose, and sort of liable to follow these wild sort of feverish compulsions of hers. And so it was lots of commas, it just changed. Like I remember I read a lot of Garth Greenwell, whose sentences sometimes go over several pages. And they're beautiful, right? They're like lilting and beautiful. And I don't really think that what I wrote resembled what he wrote, but I remember reading lots of writers where I was like, okay, I need someone whose sentences are like a train that just keeps going. Samantha, the teenager, is like very quizzical, observant, kind of detached and humorous. And Alif Batuman, I felt like was a really good prose reference point. The Idiot, which is sort of this book about this young person who treats the rituals of other young people like an alien who's landed on Earth and is trying to make sense of it, and is like can only do it through like reading Dostoevsky. And so I used that. And every section had a different sort of. I had to write 4 different mini sort of prose styles to make it hopefully work.
Anybody else? Yep.
Yes, I was wondering, Jayson, about the
Hey,
MFA
Aaron.
program. How's it going? Great book, by the way. I haven't read it yet, but I know it's going to be great. So, I was wondering if you could. I've always been curious about what that's like to write a book with one of these sort of structured writing systems, like an MFA or like or writing school, whatever. I was just wondering if you could just like describe for half a minute.
Yeah.
Half a minute.
The question was about.
I'm working.
Okay. The question was about what it's like to write the book while doing the MFA, and you're on the clock for 1 minute starting now.
It was hard. It was interesting to bring a novel that people didn't know the beginning of or the end of. I mean, I use this metaphor of like a box of broken parts. You're showing someone 20 pages of a thing, and they don't know what precedes it or what comes after it, right? MFA programs, by and large, seem to be really focused on whittling a really perfectly jewel-like short story, because you can see all sides of it, right? And you can say, well, this is clearly missing this. But you could be like, well, have you considered this character doing this? And I'm like, well, they can't, because in page 78, which you haven't seen, they do that. And they're like, oh, well, I don't know what to tell you. You know, so it was actually a big challenge, and like mushing this sort of big baggy monster through these channels of, was an interesting challenge. I did feel like I was like dragging something very large, behind me in some of these, because people were just churning out these short stories. You could talk about them, you could debate the meaning. I probably used my half a minute. It was hard.
Yes, yeah.
Partway through you writing this book, and the ChatGPT came out, and so
Yeah.
AI became like part of the zeitgeist. Focusing less on the technology, but were there any concepts that you had explored previous to that coming out that you had to scrap, or that you came to later, or any just around that event?
That's a really great question.
Did the invention of ChatGPT change your process because it happened halfway through writing the book?
And help me finish it.
I see no problem with that.
Sorry.
Really up for all the end
No, actually, I would say that what happened was that ChatGPT sort of washed a lot of the novel's like refuse of ideas onto the shore of like mainstream like culture. It was just all of a sudden I would tell people what I was working on, and I would get a variety of interested reactions. They'd be like, huh, but it was also a lot of, well, that sounds a little wild, doesn't it? And then something sort of changed that I would like to say that I sort of foresaw, but it was just the nature of the crashing wave. It just sort of crashed in a specific moment in time as I was working on this book over time. And I looked around and I realized that a lot of what I had been writing about was suddenly everywhere. And I don't think it actually changed a word of what happens or how in the actual book. Yeah.
Anybody else? Nobody else. All right, we got a couple more minutes. I might ask another question.
Go for
While
it.
somebody's going. Yeah, you wanted. We talked the other day. And you were talking about like multiple personalities and internal family systems, and I thought that was really interesting. If you want to talk about that for a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's a therapeutic modality. It's a style of therapy, IFS, as it's known, and it sort of suggested itself pretty early as I was reading. It's sort of the novel is so much about like how grief fragments us and how it makes us meet strangers in our own psyche. And IFS is this sort of modality that treats people like they're multiple people, right? I mean, and it was this idea that you should treat every patient or client like they have multiple personality disorder, right? In the same way that in movies, like in Primal Fear, or like, I'd like to talk to Roy now, where they would say like, or it would be, and it was an approach that was really pioneered treating people with eating disorders. So they would say, I'd like to talk to the person who is forcing you to do this. And what the person discovered was that people would change their body language, and their voices would change, and they would respond to a direct address as if they were themselves. They would say, well, I do this because so-and-so needs to be protected from such and such. And it became a revelatory approach. It spiraled out from there. And it works on all kinds of things. It works with whole families, and people will change chairs when they're speaking as different people, right? And it became this whole modality, and the people who developed it sort of identified that we each have, we don't each have a this and a that inside of us, but we all have a map that we created, these different voices with different agencies. And as I became drawn to this idea, it just seemed like that's what I was creating. I was creating a weather system of people with all their different voices inside of them, and some of them are outside, some of them are inside. And it just felt like the perfect way to talk about how we operate in the world. We break off parts of ourselves, we shove them deep, we try to hide them, we tell them they have to stay there, we develop other voices that yell for us when we need them to. And each of those voices has their own drives, their own reasons. And, we all know what it feels like to be yelling at someone or saying something we don't, and another voice of us being like, why are you doing that? At the same time, and this real plaintive, voice that means what they're saying just as much as the person who's in control of you at that moment. And it became a way to explore these people with these variegated, right? I mean, if you have an upload that has its own ideas about what your life means, that's essentially a character in your family system. And so that's how I used that idea. And then to make it real, I decided to go to IFS therapy. So I'm here to tell you that it's a very good form of therapy. It works really well. I heartily recommend.
Beautiful. I think that's about time for us.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Jayson. For both of you all coming out. Please stick around and sign some books.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah,
wanna say-
my pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you all again so much for coming out tonight. Thank you to Mattie and Jayson for being with us. If you're watching the live stream, you can buy a copy of the book, the link in the description. For this year, you can buy a copy of the book at the register. I can't order more until you buy them all. So, do that. You can also still make donations at the register in preferable increments of $10. That would be great. My coworkers are now pointing to where Jayson is going to be signing. There's a little drop-down desk. I'm sorry to our lovely guest who is being pointed at. We're not in this moment, but in a few moments, when I say, we're going to have you line up down this center aisle to get books personalized and signed. We do pack up the chairs pretty quickly, so watch out for your stuff. We also still have Mattie's book, and we have Jayson's other book at the front to purchase. Also do that so we can order more. So we're gonna just have you sit tight for a second while I rush Jayson back there, and then I'll shout starting the signing line, and then you can all get up from your seats. Thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thank you so much for coming.